So today we're going to be talking about other Spanish explorers slash conquistadors. And I say other Spanish explorers, not just conquistadors, because we're talking first about Cowhead. Cabeza de Vaca, head of cow. Cabeza de Vaca is very interesting, mainly because he's not just going out slaying as many Native Americans as he possibly can and spreading disease. Although he does spread a lot of disease, he ultimately is going to be remembered for what he observes and writes about in his encounters with natives and the flora and fauna of the American South, especially the American Southeast, Florida, the Gulf Coast, and even lots of places in southern Texas and the Southwest as he makes his amazing survival journey. Cabeza de Vaca was part of the Narvaez mission in 1527. Remember that just 6 years before this, Hernan Cortez had landed in Mexico at Veracruz with his force of about 500 Spaniards running from Velasquez, his in law, and then makes his way over the next 2 years to conquer the Aztec Empire and their capital city of Tenochtitlan, there, which will become Mexico City, the heart and soul, the vibrant capital of the new Spanish empire in the Americas. And so the Narvaez mission, Narvaez organizes 600 Spaniards to go and explore this great unknown northern territories. Because remember, when Columbus first lands, he lands in the Bahamas over here, and then Hispaniola and Cuba, but they didn't really know what was up here. So 600 men land. They have some pretty bad encounters with natives. Their horses all have to be destroyed and eaten so they can survive during the terrible winter. And then they're like, we need to get the heck out of Dodge. And so they cut down trees and raft together a few makeshift, well, rafts, and they're going to hug the coast, trying to avoid Native American conflict, the Gulf of Mexico coast, all along the coastline of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. When they get to Louisiana, the rafts kind of split up, and Cabeza de Vaca, as one of the lieutenants of Narvaez, he strongly urges against this. And of course, Narvaez ignores him, and Narvaez, with karma, I'm sure, and his rafts, they end up disappearing into the Gulf of Mexico, never to be seen again. So that's the ending of Narvaez. Cabeza de Vaca and his rafts, they continue on. They get to the coastline of Texas. So he and his survivors are some of the first Europeans to ever look at Texas. And in the end, there's of this 600-man mission, there's only 4 survivors, including Cabeza de Vaca. And one of those guys was actually one of the Spanish servants, a slave from Africa named Estevano. And so those guys, they live with the natives. Cabeza de Vaca writes about how they were enslaved by natives in Texas. Although this could just be because they were forced to labor in the fields like Indian women, which the Spaniards could have viewed as slavery. All jokes intended. And he works as a trader and a healer, spreading his knowledge from Europe to natives to kind of get by. And they wander through the American Southwest for years until finally the 4 survivors make their way back to New Spain and to Cortez's capital there. To tell their tale. And that's what Cabeza de Vaca is famous for basically letting Spain and, in the broader sense, Europe know what was up there, the plants, the animals, and especially the Native Americans that were there in what is going to become the continental United States. So very important. And of course, disease will also be spread. So that is Cabeza de Vaca, explorer. Also of the explorer class, you have Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. He's a famous Spanish explorer for going all the way up along the North American West Coast, the coastline of California. So think of Cabrillo, think California. On his way back, tragically, there was a rough encounter of Native Americans. He and his crew are fleeing back to their ships, and he slips on the rocks and gets a compound fracture and dies from the ensuing wound and infection. Compound fractures, by the way, interestingly, my brother had one of these, so I know. They're the kind where the bone protrudes through the skin. So I'm very sorry, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. Juan Ponce de Leon, he is a conquistador you have probably heard of with his fabled search for the Fountain of Youth. The Fountain of Youth is going to be, it's this fairy tale of the water you drink that can make you live forever. Juan Ponce de Leon, maybe he's looking for that, but what he's ultimately looking for is what all of the Spanish conquistadors are looking for. I bet you probably guessed it, is gold. Yeah, it's gold. So he's going exploring the Bahamas. Bahimi is this island where rumored there was gold, or this fountain of youth. And ultimately, he's going to be the one to touch down on Florida and really establish Florida as a Spanish outpost. Florida named because Ponce de Leon lands there on the east coast of Florida for the first time around Easter in the spring. It's beautiful, all these flowers, so beautiful flowers. That becomes Florida. He also will be the one to chart out the Florida Keys, those islands there. Um, but I think one thing that people don't know about Juan Ponce de Leon is that he's also kind of the founder of Puerto Rico, establishing San Juan, which is actually the oldest city in the United States, because remember, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. St. Augustine, the oldest continually habitated European city in the continental United States, will not be founded until 1565. Juan Ponce de Leon, he's doing his stuff in the early 1500s. For the ending of Ponce de Leon, like all of these explorers, it does not end well. Tragedy abounds. And on his mission to go and explore more of this large landmass, they have no clue how big it is. He's landing near Charlotte Bay in southwestern Florida, and an encounter with natives doesn't end too well. He gets tragically hit with a fatal blow in his leg, and his crew manages to take him back to Cuba before he dies there. So Juan Ponce de Leon with Florida. Hernando de Soto is probably the most important conquistador when it comes to the United States, just for the breadth of territory that he covers. Think of him with the American Southeast. There's his route there on the map. Hernando de Soto is also a figure that we talked about previously. He is the conquistador that is the right-hand man, so to speak, of Francisco Pizarro. He's the captain of horses, so the lieutenant. And when Emperor Atahualpa of the Incas was taken captive by Pizarro, it's Hernando de Soto that kind of befriends the emperor and is kind to him and keeping him occupied with games and stuff. While they're filling up those coffers, those rooms with gold and silver, the emperor's ransom. And Hernando de Soto is rewarded by Atahualpa before his death with trinkets and rewards and gold. And by Pizarro with much of the riches of their conquest of the Incas. Down in South America. So Hernando de Soto is loaded. This guy is filthy stinking rich. He's got more gold than he knows what to do with, but wait, he's got an idea. He wants to pick up where Narvaez left off. There's this great, big, uncharted territory to the north of the Spanish colonies, and he wants a piece of that action. And using Cabeza de Vaca's records and stuff. Hernando de Soto is going to organize a very large mission. Over 700 Spaniards and men of other European countries are going to take part. They're going to bring horses. They're going to bring pigs for food. They're going to bring cattle. This is a major undertaking. They land in Florida. This is in the 1530s. They land in Florida, encounter natives. They also encounter a Spaniard, a castaway from a previous mission named Juan Ortiz, who will serve as a translator. And this was a common thing. Castaways that had been living in and among the natives for years will prove to be valuable interpreters. De Soto also will capture many natives and force them to be interpreters along the routes. So they battle and trade with natives in Florida. They winter in Apalachee, which is an Indian village. Yes, going to be later named the Appalachian Mountains after this tribe. And they hear stories about a very rich kingdom north of them that has gold. So De Soto's mission journeys up north into what is today Georgia and even South Carolina. They don't find gold, but they do find Indian tribe very powerful, has a female leader. She gives them pearls. Okay, so some riches. And they get into North Carolina, Tennessee, through the Appalachian Mountains, and into Alabama. And when they get to Alabama, they encounter a pretty stiff opposition from the Mobila people. This is where you get like Mobile, Alabama. And the Battle of Mobila is very fierce. A lot of the remaining horses that De Soto still had are killed. Over 200 of his men are killed. Many more natives die. This was one of the fiercest battles in the United States between Europeans and Native Americans. And so, beleaguered and weakened, the Spaniards continue on their quest for gold and discovery, go through Mississippi, and finally, big discovery, the Mississippi River, major waterway, is seen for the first Europeans on the Hernando de Soto mission. They continue on through Arkansas, discovering hot springs and everything else, and then back to the Mississippi, where Hernando de Soto finally succumbs to disease. His crew give him um, not a Viking funeral, but they set him off on a rowboat, his body down the Mississippi, weighted down with sand. So his final resting place of Hernando de Soto, the great conquistador explorer, is on the Mississippi around here, Louisiana. The rest of his crew and survivors, chased by natives, flee down the river into Texas and finally out into the Gulf, hugging it as they try to limp their way back to New Spain, just kind of like Cabeza de Vaca and those survivors did from the Narvaez mission. But this had 311 or so survivors, so much bigger effort and a lot more territory charted, at least in the southeast of the United States. One of the other big impacts besides the Mississippi River from this Hernando de Soto mission was Columbian Exchange. It wasn't just De Soto dying from disease, they spread disease like wildfire among the Native American populaces of this area. And I want you to think about the impact of this later on. Okay, we get the French coming down the Mississippi into Louisiana, Cajun country. We get the English coming along the American East Coast, the Carolinas, Georgia. When they come to these places, they encounter Native Americans, but not as many as you would expect. And that is because native populations were wiped out by the diseases that De Soto brought through. And his mission, especially, was devastating because he brought those livestock animals, the cattle and the pigs that he brought, many of with pigs becoming free, becoming like the mascot, the Razorbacks of Arkansas and stuff. They spread diseases that the Native Americans had no immunity to, that they had never been exposed to because they'd never lived with these animals. Francisco Coronado, like Ponce de Leon, is probably a conquistador that many of you have heard of before. Famously, he searched the American Southwest for the 7 lost cities of Cibola, the cities of gold that were rumored by Native Americans to exist somewhere that was just beyond the Spanish. And that's a common theme from De Soto to Coronado on these missions of exploration that once the natives find out what the Spanish are looking for, they tell the Spanish, "Oh, you want gold? It's just over yonder. Please leave my territory and go find your gold now." And they keep shuffling the Spanish on and on. So Coronado's mission in the 1640s, he's exploring the American Southwest, the states of Arizona, New Mexico, and the natives, the Pueblo people, the Spanish called them because they live in these towns. And now today we associate the Pueblo with like the clay brick that's used in the Southwest. But these Pueblo people, they keep shuffling Coronado onward, and he eventually ends up not in the Southwest. He's way out there searching for the lost cities of gold in Kansas, of all places, before he finally catches on that he might have been duped. And so Coronado travels back. And lasting impact wise, I mean, he's scouted out the American Southwest. There's going to be Spanish colonies, fairly large for this early time period, established in like Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the Pueblo people will be subjugated by the Spanish from the 1640s onward. Juan de Oñate, right around the turn of the century in 1598, is going to bring in settlers and livestock along the Rio Grande and further colonize this area, as well as being extremely brutal to the native populace. After small uprising, Onate orders every Pueblo man above the age of 25 to have their right foot cut off. Of course, that was basically death due to the infection at the time that would result in. Brutal stuff the Pueblo were subjected to. And meanwhile, in about the century before what's going to be this Pueblo revolt in New Mexico, the Spaniards aren't just cruelly subjugating Native Americans on their encomiendas. Remember, an encomienda is a Spanish plantation where native slave labor was used to harvest crops. They're also being forced to provide taxes, like cornmeal, ground corn, and any other products that they could as compensation to the Spanish. Um, and for the Spanish, you got to remember they think they're actually giving the natives a good deal. That's the funny part of all this. They believe, well, we're converting you to Christianity, where that's all these missions are set up. Excuse me. All these Franciscan friars and priests are coming over. They're converting the natives, forcing them to convert to Catholicism, and basically granting the natives eternal life through their conversion. So the Spanish believe they're doing the Native Americans a great service. They truly believe that. And in exchange, what's a little servitude? So that's kind of where a lot of the Spanish are coming from on this. For the natives, I mean, their entire culture is being stripped from them. When they're being converted, they are forced to forsake their own native religions, their idols, their dance, their songs, their entire culture is being ripped from them. And so it's a combination of these factors: the brutal suppression of the Pueblo people, and a series of droughts that take place in the 1670s that result in the famous Pueblo Uprising. They're in the Santa Fe colony of the Spanish in the Southwest. And almost 400 Spaniards and 600 Pueblo people are killed in this uprising. And this is one of those rare episodes where the natives actually defeat their European overlords. The Pueblo kick the Spanish out of New Mexico all the way to El Paso. It was pretty impressive. They were led by the Pueblo, not a lot is known about him, named Pope. And eventually, within the next 30, 40 years, the Spanish do come back into the area, but they are going to be a little bit gun shy. They will have to revise some of their previous methods. They'll have to be a little bit more respectful of native culture. Um, Oh, and by the way, since I love horses, I'm also going to mention that it's in this century, like from the 1500s to the Pueblo Revolt. You also have the Apache doing raids. Well, they start to do them on horseback because a lot of these missions and outposts in Southwest, they brought horses. Some of those horses were freed, end up in Indian hands. Indians learn how to ride the horse. This is where the Plains Indians, the Plains Native American tribes, begin to utilize the horse in warfare and in everything else that they would do in their lives, revolutionizing their culture. I want you to compare and contrast the different ways that Europeans had of interacting with the Native Americans. That's going to be a big theme from our first unit. And so, with the Spanish, the first big European group that we're looking at, because they're the first to come over in a big way, starting with Columbus, they do assimilate. Remember, assimilation is where you try to integrate one group with another. This is going to be different from the English, and it's going to compare in some ways to the French. So, first off, with the English, remember, they don't want to assimilate. The English largely want to have the natives be away from them, maybe do some trade, but the English are not interested in marrying into native culture, or having native children, or mixing with the Native Americans, or using them for slave labor. By the time the English come over, they will be using African Americans, not natives. For the French, their relationship with the Native Americans, because they're coming over in single man status, not in family groups like the English will be, like in the Massachusetts Bay Area. The French are coming over as fur trappers and as groups that basically will rely very much on Native American support. So they need the natives as allies. And I'm not going to say that the French are totally nice and kumbaya-ing it with the natives, but they're going to be a lot friendlier in their relations than the Spanish, or the English. So back to the Spanish, what are they like? Well, already you know about the horrors inflicted, the black legend that Bartholomew de las Casas wrote about there on the colonies that were started by Columbus. We know about his treatment of the natives, and we know how that persisted with many others through the encomienda. That natives were brutally raped and killed, even hunted down by Spanish dogs on these Caribbean islands. And the practice continues in the New Spain colony on the continental United States, or in Central America. So brutal enslavement and subjugation by the Spanish, but also you have a mixing. Look at Cortez and La Malinche, right? Having the first child of mixed ancestry. This was not just going to be Cortez. This was going to be many Spaniards, many Spanish men coming over, married or not, and having relations with Native American women. This mestizo class is going to be born. That's a mixed heritage of Spanish and Native American children. And so they're not opposed to that intermixing as much as, say, like the English will be. Also, the Spanish Catholic religion, the Pope, the Crown, they are going to be addressing some of the Native American issues and kind of pushing for integration of Native Americans into Spanish culture. However, regardless of what the Spanish wants, brutal torture happens, brutal enslavement, stripping of their culture, and most notably, a thing most out of their control, disease as a result of the Spanish being there ravages native populations. A hacienda was a Spanish, it could be a Spanish plantation, a mine, a ranch. It was a place usually in the state that the Spaniards had, that was for the purpose of making money in some form. Now, that's to be tied with the encomienda. Where we talked about the Spanish plantation. But encomienda refers more to like the system versus the hacienda, which is the actual like estate. Now, the Spanish adhered to a very strict legal system in New Spain, in the colonies of the New World, as far as their caste went, the classes of people. So this was a legal